Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm going to be debunking the man, the myth, the legend, the rock star, GodLogic. Ladies and gentlemen, he did an interview with CBN where he makes some preposterous claims, dare I say. So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to look at these claims, we're going to dissect them, and of course, we're going to debunk them. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Buckle your seats, grab yourself a halal drink, and let's do this.
With Avery Austin of GodLogic Apologetics. Now, Avery, you're kind of one of the most vocal critics of Islam, which is not necessarily an easy place to be. Well, let's say my friend here clicked on this video, they saw you, and they don't want the fluff, they don't want the niceties, they just want the truth. So let's just give it to them. Why is Islam false and Christianity true?
Okay, so one, I would say that Christianity, let me start with Christianity. Christianity is true because of the evidence of the resurrection of Christ. The Bible says that if Christ didn't rise from the dead, our faith would literally be in vain. There'll be nothing. Well, guess what? There's an empty tomb. We know where Jesus was buried, and it's empty. And a bunch of people saw him alive again. A bunch of cowards became courageous and started preaching the gospel, claiming that they saw this Jesus, who we all saw got crucified. So that's how we know that Christianity is true. The previous prophets foretold about this crucifixion and resurrection, and then we saw it happen in history. Now, Islam is false because it goes against that reality, right? It goes against truth, while at the same time saying that it affirms it. So
I just want to say something before we even start debunking his claims. What's the go with this guy? Why is he glazing so much, man? He's about to get married. I felt like he was flirting, man. He was like on him, you know what I'm saying? Like, damn, bro, just chill. The way he was like, yeah. Literally was like GodLogic was preaching the gospels or so. First claim he's making, essentially he's saying is that Christianity is true because of the resurrection, you know, and the way he's presenting it as it is a fact. With absolute certainty, we know that the resurrection has actually occurred. So the first question I would like to ask, ladies and gentlemen, is what kind of evidence would someone need to prove that the resurrection is true, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, correct? So I made this using ChatGPT, so shoot me. But evidence requirement for the resurrection to be a historical fact. So first and foremost, early independent sources. So what does that mean? Multiple independent attestations close in time to the event, not decade later. Eyewitness testimony. Verifiable accounts from people who claim to have seen Jesus alive after death, written by themselves or reliably recorded. Beautiful, beautiful. Contemporary documentation, written from non-Christian historians or neutral sources from the 1st century CE. Fourthly, consistent and corroborated accounts, reports from different sources that agree on major details, not contradicting each other on key facts. Example, who Jesus was, who saw Jesus, where and when. And then physical or archaeological evidence. So first and foremost, we can already get rid of one of those, which is contemporary documentation. We do not have any contemporary documentation from non-Christians regarding the resurrection. We do have some regarding Jesus, that a man called Jesus existed, sure, but we don't have anything regarding the resurrection. So straight off the bat, that leaves us with 4. Early independent sources, eyewitness testimony, consistent and corroborated accounts, and physical and archaeological evidence. So what are the sources that we have? So firstly, let's start with that. What are our earliest sources for the resurrection? First and foremost, we've got Paul's letter. So these are not accurate timelines, but like close enough, around the time, all right? So Paul's letters, 48 to 60 CE, Mark 65 to 70 CE, Matthew 80 to 85 CE, Luke 85 to 90 CE, John 90 to 100 CE. Okay, beautiful. So these are our earliest documentation that record the resurrection or mention the resurrection. All right. So what we will need to ask ourselves do they contradict each other? Are they eyewitness testimony? How far were they recorded within the correct timeline or decades after the resurrection? So these are the questions that we should ask ourselves when looking at the evidence. So let's get to it. First and foremost, we're going to go to how Jesus became God by Bart Ehrman. If you're a Christian, man, you need to read this book straight up, and I have other recommendations that I will start showing more in the channel, but let's look what he says. We do, of course, have our ancient sources, but they are not as ancient as we would like. Our first Christian author is the Apostle Paul, who was writing 20 or 30 years after Jesus' death. A number of Paul's letters are included in the New Testament. Other Christian authors may have been writing earlier than Paul, but none of their work survived. The problem with Paul are that he didn't actually know Jesus personally, and that he doesn't tell us very much about Jesus' teaching. Our earliest source, which is Paul's letters, right, which are in the New Testament, straight off the bat, he's not an eyewitness to the resurrection, and he wasn't an eyewitness to the resurrection. He never met Jesus, and his letters came decades after the resurrection. Our next earliest sources of information about the historical Jesus are the Gospels of the New Testament. As it turns out, these are our best sources. They are best not because they happen to be in the New Testament, but because they are also the earliest narratives of Jesus' life to survive. But even though they are the best sources available to us, they are really not as good as we might hope. This is for several reasons. To begin with, they are not written by eyewitnesses. We call these books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John because they are named after two of Jesus' earthly disciples. Matthew, the tax collector, and John, the beloved disciple, and two of the close companions of the other apostles. Mark, the secretary of Peter, and Luke, the traveling companion of Paul. But in fact, the books were written anonymously. The authors have never identified themselves, and they circulated for decades before anyone claimed they were written by these people. The first certain attribution of these books to this author is century after they were produced. Okay, so the letters of Paul, he's not an eyewitness. He never met Jesus. It came decades after Jesus or after the resurrection. Okay, beautiful. The Gospels, they're not eyewitnesses. Even worse, they're anonymous. We don't even know who wrote them, right? They came even later than the resurrection. So the only question we have now is, do they contradict each other? Do they tell different accounts of the same story? Okay, because so far, and I'm going to be quite frank with you Christians, right? And I'm not trying to attack anyone, but if this was the Quran in any shape or form, because we have a way preserved book than you guys, and this is a fact. You guys can deny it, you guys can dilly-dally around there, you can cry about it, you can do whatever, it's up to you. But we do, and you guys nitpick at the tiniest bits when you guys don't even know who wrote the Gospels. And some of the letters of Paul are not really the letters of Paul. But obviously, I know there's scholarly consensus on, which are's and which aren't, So I get that part, right? So anyway, so now what we're going to look, do they contradict each other? Do they tell different accounts of the same story? That's what we're going to do now. Also, another thing that I forgot to mention, which is that there are good reasons for thinking that none of these attribution is right. For one thing, the followers of Jesus, as we learn from the New Testament itself, were uneducated, lower-class Aramaic-speaking Jews from Palestine. These books are not written by people like that. Their authors were highly educated, Greek-speaking Christian of later generation. So another thing to point out: the people who wrote the Gospels don't even speak the mother tongue of Jesus. They don't even speak Aramaic, which is interesting. So do the accounts contradict each other, or do they tell a difference? Do they mention different things in the story of the resurrection? So we've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, so who was first to the tomb? We've got Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. We've got in Mark, first to the tomb was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Okay. In Luke, first to the tomb is Mary Magdalene, Mary mother of James, Joanna, other women, and Peter. Okay. John, first to the tomb, Mary Magdalene, Simon Peter, the disciple Jesus loved. Okay, cool. So straight off the bat, was Peter there? Was Peter not there? Was Mary Magdalene there? Was Mary, the mother of James, there? Or was she not? In Mark's gospel, the woman fled from the tomb and said nothing to anyone. Okay, that's the famous erupted ending of Mark. You would find these only in Matthew's gospel, which is a violent earthquake, an angel of the Lord rolled back the stone, frightened guards who became like dead men. Okay, cool. What about Luke? 2 angels greet the women in the tomb. The risen Jesus appears to the followers on the road to Emmaus and disappears in the breaking of the bread with them. Okay, cool. What about John? There is an accusation of grave robbery. 2 disciples race to the tomb. Jesus' linen are discussed at length. Mary weeps and sees 2 angels. Okay, beautiful. So straight off the bat, they do contradict each other, and this is a known fact. And what Christians and most Christians know that, and what most Christians would try to do is they say, hold on a second, mate. All right, listen here, you Arab, you Islams, right? Let me tell you something. These are not. You ready? Are you ready for this one? Because this is a good one. I love this one. Right, when they tell me, they're like, these are 4 different accounts. So they're not one story, okay? It's not one story. It's not 4 gospels saying the same story but contradicting each other. No. It's 4 different accounts. Cha. I like this one. I really do. So let's look into that one. Ladies and gentlemen. If we go the case against the empty tomb by Peter Kirby. We go slightly down here. What are the facts? Which statements of the evangelist are correct? Sad to say, none can tell. All that can be said is that the Gospel of Mark, the oldest Gospel from which the other evangelists drew most of their materials, was used by them with great freedom, and that their disagreements are indicative of the fact that when these narratives were recorded by them, there was no definite and settled tradition concerning the incident around the tomb of Jesus. This does not necessarily mean that the evangelists tried to deceive their readers. To them, each added detail became a conviction, however ill-founded, unverified, and unverifiable, until a string of legends were accepted as historical facts. Thus, the discrepancies between the Gospels highlight that redaction criticism explains the post-Markan Gospel narratives of the resurrection are legends and fiction built up around the empty tomb story in the Gospel of Mark. The statement made by, and this is the most important part I want you guys to focus on, the statement made by James Dunn that the 4 Gospels provide united testimony of at least 2 or 3 different accounts of the empty tomb is wrong. Archbishop Peter kindly writes, the presence of discrepancies might be a sign of historicity if we had 4 clearly independent but slightly different versions of the story. If only for the reason that 4 witnesses are better than 1, but of course it is now impossible to argue that what we have in the 4 gospel accounts of the empty tomb are 4 contemporaneous but independent account of the one event. Modern redactional studies of the traditional account for the discrepancy are literally development at the hand of later redactors of what was originally one report of the empty tomb. There is no suggestion that the tomb was discovered by different witnesses on 4 different occasions. So essentially what he's trying to say that there's, number one, no evidence, right, anywhere in the gospel indicating that these are 4 different accounts, right? There's no evidence to support that claim. What it is that it is 4 people telling one story or grabbing their source from one place, right, and contradicting each other and adding things and removing, okay, let's not say removing, I don't want to say that, but adding things based on the tradition that is surrounding them in their times. Since all accounts of the empty tomb are dependent on Mark, the story hangs by a slender thread indeed. The evidence that follows will cut that thread by showing that the story in Mark is most likely fictional. So first and foremost, and this is what I'm gonna just summarize, there is evidence that Joseph of Arimathea is a fictional character. So Joseph of Arimathea, number one, we don't even know if that place exists, and we don't even know if this person exists. There is no evidence to even support this. So early independent sources, we do not. They come decades later. Okay, are they eyewitnesses? No, they are not. None of the none of our sources are eyewitnesses. Beautiful. Contemporary documentations, we do not have. Consistent and corroborated accounts, again, we do not have this. So straight off the bat, we're already failing 4 criteria. So Paul, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and John, they're not eyewitnesses. They forget about Paul in this occasion, but they're not eyewitnesses. They don't speak Aramaic, they speak Greek, their story contradict each other. Some add things, like, some things are added in John that are not in Luke, things are in Luke that is not in Matthew, and none of the things in the other 3 Gospels are in Mark, right? In fact, in Mark, it says that the women never told anyone. They just kept it to themselves, which explains the added verses in Mark later on, because they wanted to, Anyway, so that leaves us with one thing, which is physical or archaeological evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I find this, like the archaeological evidence, absolutely weak. For the simple reason that they come 300 years after Jesus' resurrection, of their claimed resurrection, should I say. I find them very weak. I don't think there is no case to be built. And if anyone is trying to build the case on the archaeological evidence, the burden of proof is on them. And quite frankly to say, they put it this way: if this was Muslims, right? Let's say hypothetically that Muslims said, I don't know, So they made an outrageous claim, and we needed archaeological evidence, hypothetically, right? And the only evidence that we use comes 300 years after this event. Would you Christians take this? You guys would not. You guys would not. And to be frank with you, no Christian scholar takes it as well. At least no serious Christian scholar takes it as well. So the burden on proof is on the Christians on this one. Okay, so one of my colleagues bring this to my attention, which is the Holy Site of Sepulchre. This is an archaeological review by PhD New Testament scholar Craig Evans, and it's called The Tomb of Jesus Wrong on Every Account. And it's a really good read. I highly recommend that you guys give it a read. It's really good. So he says, but for the sake of argument, let's assume that these objections are indeed all wrong. Even if we grant that Jesus' family had a tomb in Jerusalem and not in Galilee, that they could afford and had a desire to own a rock-cut family tomb of the type favored by Jerusalem wealthy, that Jesus' ossuary would have been inscribed simply as Jesus, son of Joseph, and not Jesus of Nazareth, or with the title Master or Messiah. And the early Christian community in Jerusalem not only would have forgotten where their leader had been buried, but would later come up with an entirely spurious tradition that he was buried where the Holy Sepulchre would be later built in. If we assume all that, how strong of a case do the makers of the lost tomb of Jesus have? The answer is surprisingly weak. And ladies and gentlemen, that would be all for today. So I was actually my plan for this video was to actually debunk his whole claim in the video, but I was looking into the resurrection for a long time. So we're just gonna leave it at that for today. If you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I will try to post once a week. Any of my Christian viewers, if you guys are watching, please comment below. Is there any archaeological evidence that I have missed and that you guys think is a decent evidence for that built the case? But in my opinion, there is no eyewitnesses. As you said, the resurrection fails all criteria for it to be a historical fact. So therefore, it is false. I do not believe in it. But with that said, have a great day and assalamu alaikum.